Morning, everybody. My name is Kalpana Ketinedi. I'm a software developer turned technical product manager turned entrepreneur. My latest gig is called Case Curries. We make ready-to-cook meal kits for Indian food. Just add water and cook, and you have a meal in 15 to 20 minutes. But going with the audacity of the theme of Startup Boston this year, I switched from software product management to hardware, like products. So not to bore you with any of my career background, I'm sure you'll find on LinkedIn, but I'm going to introduce our speakers. Before I do that, I wanted to get a little bit of a poll on who are current PMs or aspiring PMs, just to get an idea to our speakers of who they are reaching out to. That's it? PM? Current PMs. Let's go with that. All right. And then aspiring PMs. All right. With that, I'll introduce I'll pass it on to who we have. Stephanie Roche is connecting from Austin, Texas. She's a PM at Signify Health. Stephanie, do you want to do a quick intro of what you do?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Stephanie Rowe, and as she said, I'm currently a product manager for Signify Health, where we essentially strive to improve patient outcomes and value-based care via in-home health evaluations. I'm specifically the product manager for the backend services team, working on all the APIs and transferring the data in the background. So that's currently what I do. I previously worked in the industrial automation space, incorporating AI and deep learning, where I started out as a software engineer, and then moved more into product marketing and product management.
All right. Alicio Miranda. Yep, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right. Cool. I'm Alicio Miranda. Nice to meet y'all. I've been obsessed with autonomous driving and automotive for 10 years now. I've done a whole bunch of different things. It's sometimes easy to forget. Hardware, releasing radars, software, writing perception software, validation and systems engineering, driving cars across the country. I worked for Chrysler for a long time, launching Jeep and Dodge products. I worked for some startups, Lucid Air, which was one of my personal crowning babies that I like to see on the road from now. So if you see him, amazing. I also have worked in the robotaxi space here in Boston. I was at Motional, where I was a product manager for autonomy. Eventually became a product lead for autonomy as well. And today I work at Gatic, which is a middle mile autonomous trucking solution company, where I'm the group product manager for autonomy there. And then I'm also an actor, which is something totally different. So good to meet y'all.
And then we have Jessica Hajian from Whoop. I hope that.
Hey everyone, I'm Jessica Hajian. I'm the director of engineering program management at Whoop, and that's this thing right here. And it was a wearable health device, and I really sort of straddle the line between engineering and product, and how the teams work together and how we get work done. Unlike Alicio, I actually am a classic car restoration expert, so no new cars for me. I love classic cars. That's my my little obsession. Did not drive one here today, drove a new car, but I love existing in that space where product and engineering meet and figuring out how teams can work together to get the best work done as quick as possible. So.
All right. Thank you. So today's conversation will all be about product specifications. Initially, we might start a little bit about an intro of what is a product spec, what's in there, who the audience are. But we also want to dig into conversations where collaboration and communication with stakeholders, and then possibly lead into lessons learned through all of our careers. And then the goal is to give a 10-minute audience questions. So, all right, with that, I'm going to start. Our first conversation will be around maybe Alicio. I'll kick it off with you. Can you briefly share your product experience? And then, are you a product specifications? I think in general, they are handled differently at different companies. So,
Yeah. I've been really lucky to have worked for so many different types of companies. Working at Chrysler, for example, is very different than working at Lucid Motors, a burgeoning kind of Silicon Valley automotive tech company. And then which is also different from working at Motional, which is like a pure robo-taxi, very much tech-driven, very much software focused, although there was a big hardware component too. And everywhere that I've worked, the requirements culture has been different. And it's created sort of a different approach as a product manager, as someone who's trying to develop the products, as far as how you communicate these things to the teams. And one of the most, I'd say, profound takeaways that I've gotten from that is that you have to really try and understand what you're trying to accomplish with the product requirements spec. What is it that you're trying to communicate, and how are you telling a story about what you're trying to build? Because that is what ultimately has ended up informing much of how I approach a product requirements document, as opposed to going the other way around, which is like, I'm going to write these requirements and then try to shop it around and say, hey, this is what we're trying to build. Are you okay with it, right? It's really built up my sort of sensitivity muscles, as far as like, this team needs this, then maybe I should think a different way about how I'm doing that, or this team needs that. So that's kind of been my experience as far as product requirements culture goes. And I've also been in a big battle, maybe battle is the wrong way to look at it, but sometimes it can be a battle. The old way of doing requirements, waterfall, traditional sort of automotive development, versus the new way, which is agile, Silicon Valley kind of quick iterations, going back and adjusting specifications. There's especially in the hardware side, there seems to be this tension between, we need everything up front now, and we need to know so that we can lock things in and go through the hardware development lifecycle, versus we need to test, iterate, and change requirements as we learn more about our software. So it's been really fortunate and a real blessing to be able to get both sides of it and start developing perspective on how these things are related or not related, and when things work and when they don't work. So that's kind of been my background.
Yeah. Jessica. Oh, Stephanie, sorry. I don't know how I can. So you're in the healthcare space, and I guess there's some PHI, PAI, and type of stuff. Is there anything different that you could add to your experience? Well, I don't know where.
Can everyone hear me? I've been told I can't be heard virtually.
We can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I mean, I will say I have similar sentiments of like my experience being in hardware and software previously versus now in the health tech space. Requirements have changed. The need and structure of that has also looked different. And that's something that I've tackled as a new PM in health tech. I think in general, at a high level, I'm definitely pro PRD or product specifications. I think we can all agree it's a blueprint of what a product should look like, but I also don't think that's such a rigid, set in stone document. I think there are a lot of iterations that can occur. It's going to change. It's going to develop and mature as the product goes on, but I think it's a great launching pad to set a product up for success.
Jessica, you want to?
Sure. So I'm coming at it sort of from the engineering angle. And so what I know engineers need from a product spec is, well, what they don't want to happen is they go build something and it's not what was intended. And then they have to rebuild it. And then they rebuild that. And then, oops, there was a requirement that wasn't there and it was missed. They have to rebuild it again. That's not so I totally agree with Alicia. We want to get to agility, not necessarily capital A agile, but agility. We want to be able to move fast, iterate. So that's why I think that a PRD should be MVP. And you should clearly say, what is in the MVP, minimum viable product? What is a nice to have, a should have, maybe this is okay. We don't really know about this, but you don't need to make something super fancy and super detailed, but it has to have the base requirements so that the engineering team knows what to build. Now, I don't think you need final designs as part of a PRD. I think you can have lo-fi designs, you can have a napkin sketch, you can have something. But what you don't want to happen is you don't want an engineering team to go build a blue button. That's a silly example. But you don't want them to build a blue button and then all of a sudden you're saying, well, it's a blue square button. I wanted a green round button. Well, then you should have put that in the product spec. So I usually say to product managers, anything that you would reject this when it goes through product review, if you would say that's not what I want, put it in the product requirements document. Otherwise, leave it up to the team that's building it. They should control the how, and you sort of from a product angle are representing the user and saying, as this type of user persona, I want XYZ. Keep it minimum. Let the team work out how it gets done, and then iterate on it. The worst thing that happens with teams is that back and forth, and then you're never actually putting anything into the wild and seeing how your users feel about it. You're just constantly internally battling over something and thinking if it's right or wrong. Let the people who are paying for your product decide, and put it out there as minimum as you can. And so I think while I don't agree with I'm sort of in the gray area between life and death to the product spec. I think like a little bit of life, maybe like a little sprout. And I think it just has to be done the right way. And like Stephanie and Alicia, like I've been at different companies who do it different ways. I've seen teams that don't do any product specking, jump right into Jira or whatever software you're using for tracking, and write an epic and then write stories, and there's no design. So then the team goes and designs it, and then it's not what the product manager intended in their head, but because they didn't take it out of their head and put it on paper, now we're in that cycle. So that's a whole lot of words to say that I'm in the gray area of between life and death to the product spec.
Kind of we're leading into our next discussion, which is what is in a product, what is in a PRD, and who is it for, like which stakeholders, and kind of what are you trying to communicate? Again, like you're coming from an engineering perspective, but I think there's more audience to that. Do you want to kind of kick off that conversation, and we'll give it to Alicia maybe?
Sure. So it's interesting. I think there are a lot of stakeholders when it comes to a PRD. There's engineering, because engineering is typically at a larger company going to write their tech plan based on a PRD. So they're going to, if there's anything brought up in a PRD, like you want some sort of lo-fi design, you want to understand who you're designing for, why you're designing it, and maybe even include a business case. Normally there's like some sort of funding decision. You don't want to take every idea that everybody, you don't want to have that shiny thing syndrome where everybody's saying this idea. So there's some sort of funding decision. And so there has to be some sort of business case. How is this product, how is this feature going to move the needle on our OKRs, or going to move the needle for our membership, or whatever? So there has to be some sort of business case, and then there should be some design, and there should be some background on, the user persona, and sort of how you would go write an agile scrum epic. As this type of user, I want this feature so that I can whatever the outcome, not just for an OKR and internally, but the outcome for the member, what you want the member to be. I think if you have those three things, or those four things maybe, you can get by. At Whoop, we do very detailed product specs, and because it is a device that deals with hardware, SIGPROC, we're dealing with members' PII, their health data. There's a lot of detail that goes in there. The previous company I was at, we could have written, it was software product. There was nothing that it's not a wearable. So you could write something a little less detailed, as long as you know the expectation that what you're going to get out is exactly what you put in.
Yeah.
I was having coffee with a friend yesterday who made an interesting comment where he said, product managers, product leaders tend to be the most entrepreneurial folks within an organization, apart from the CEO or the founders or whatever you're doing, right? And to Jessica's point, I feel like understanding the business case, the why, like what are you trying to accomplish with a product spec, drive as much of what goes into it. Because in order for you as the product person to move the product where you want it to go, to move the organization where you want it to go, you need to first understand who the stakeholders are. Who are you communicating to? What sponsors do you need to actually drive that forward? And that can take many different forms, right? If you're deeper into an organization, say you're working on a component within a larger system as a whole, your audience might be just software engineers. They might be just, we have this, in the autonomous driving land, let's say it's a perception component. Perception works with every other component to deliver a autonomous driving system. If you're just delivering that component, there's certain metrics that align and say this is what we are trying, this is what says our component is good. And perhaps you're trying to move the needle on a certain metric. And it's good when you understand how that metric aligns with the rest of your business case as an organization, right? And your job as the product person for that component is to figure out how to communicate that to the team in a way that makes sense so that they can build something. And you're really setting the bar as far as this is what will make us successful. And I think one thing that you don't want to do is eliminate creativity by putting in too many things that ultimately will guide them to something, but it may not be the right thing and it may not be the best thing. Mm-hmm. I think that's really important to recognize that you're trying to guide people towards a picture of what will make us successful as a team. And as you start to maybe abstract away, maybe you're growing in an organization as a product leader, you have more products to be responsible for, or you're looking at things very cross-functionally from an entire organization's perspective. Your stakeholders might change. The way that you communicate might change. Perhaps now you're looking at more of a system level design and you're working more closely with designers as well as engineers, different types of engineers. So the way that you communicate to that group maybe has different metrics that you're trying to impact, maybe has different goals or different designs. Like what are you trying to do as an organization? Are you saying we need to get this car to drive from point A to point B, and this is what makes us successful in order to do that, and this is how it breaks down, and this is kind of what, say, systems engineering teams need to be able to design. The perception team has to do this, the controls team has to do that, they have to do that. And the way that you communicate that all together changes. And one final thing that I'll add to this is that the size of your organization also, I think, impacts the way that you communicate. At Gatik today, we're a smaller team. We're 90 people. And things can happen very quickly. The way that we communicate tends to be very ad hoc almost. Mm-hmm. And my biggest concern as a product person isn't so much can we communicate to the team what needs to get done. I think we can do that very effectively. My biggest thing is, are we documenting so that we can verify that we've built the thing that we set out to build? And I can write a product spec that does that very, very quickly, as opposed to telling more of a story at different levels of the organization. So when it comes to the question of life or death through the product spec, I believe in creative freedom and in the ability to tell stories. Perhaps this is more of the actor coming out in me in this session right now, but communication is communication, and to me, a product spec is just a tool in order to communicate. And I hate getting lost in it needs to be this way. You need to have these sections. You need to have these requirements. Take a step back. At least this is what I try to do: is take a step back and really look at your business case, what you're trying to accomplish, and then come up with the best way to communicate that based on all the available information that you have.
Yeah, thank you. I like to add my 2 cents. Working for one of the top Fortune 4 companies. It's a huge company, and we built from bottom up a connected device platform, IoT platform. So we have data not just from trackers, but glucometers, blood pressure monitors. And my goal is to make sure, it's a B2B, because then it's an enterprise platform. App developer teams are my direct consumers, but then I have to think about the end consumer. But I have lots of stakeholders, starting with infrastructure, and then we have legal, and then we have security, and how do we make sure everyone's is on the same page? I cannot have 100 meetings to bring the alignment. I see that as being an alignment document. For example, if we want to build a certain way, and then say we couldn't move data in a certain way from a cloud AWS to GCP, then the reasons are outlined there is that we need to go a certain way. I do agree that I'm a pro product PRE in big organizations, and it'll help you leverage a lot of your overhead to communicate effectively. And it could be Confluence, whatever. Typically I used to have notifications turned on this, so you get notified when you have clear updates. But that's from my experience. Anything else you want to add, Stephanie?
Yeah, no, I just want to echo what Jessica and Alicia have said. I mean, I totally agree. I think a PRD or specifications, they're more of, alignment on the business vision or company vision. And I think as long as that remains focused and constant, the rest of the stakeholders, especially in my opinion, the product manager and the developers, can help fill in those gaps as to what that solution looks like. That can be, I think that's where the flexibility comes in. Because like we said, things can change. There are going to be iterations, but as long as the vision and the solution for solving that problem remain constant, I think that's really essential.
I just wanted to mention one thing that I forgot is that one of the big stakeholders of the PRD time, if you're making a PRD, you're probably going to, or an alignment document, this is probably going to get built. Bring in your membership services, your customer service people at that point, because they can start noodling on how they're going to talk to the members if something goes awry with this. When you release this, what are the communications? So what's marketing going to say to the members or the users? And membership services are your first line. They're the first line between the company and your users. And generally, people are going to get a good or bad feeling about the company based on those interactions. Get membership services teams in there early, knowing what the features are coming out, kind of having their roadmap for, okay, this might be released in this quarter. And then as you get closer, you can narrow down a date. But just so they can sort of understand what's coming down the pike and how they should prepare to talk to the members and react to things.
Yeah. So once you have it, how do you ensure effective collaboration? I guess like as you are writing a PRD, who do you bring to the table, and how do you cross-functionally collaborate? Who wants to take?
I can let me tell a story about a time that a PRD failed miserably. So I was a new product manager at a big company was scaling, and there were lots of big personalities. There were lots of people who had a lot of responsibility, directors of certain components and things like that. And the product organization was tiny in comparison to an enormous engineering organization. And there wasn't a lot of experience working back and forth between the two functions. And I, as the first product manager for autonomy, came in and was like, I am going to lead the way and show everybody the lights about how we should be developing autonomy. And I wrote an insane specification. It was amazing. It was, I was very proud of it personally, of course. And I had everything I could, all my experience, boom, 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 boom. And I set a big meeting, invited all the directors, invited all the engineering leaders. This is our product spec. And they looked at me and they were like, what are you doing? Alicio, you haven't talked to any of us about this. And I was like, yeah, but look at how great it is. And they were like, we have this problem, we have this problem, we have that problem, we have that problem. And I was like, oh my God, I just made the biggest mistake on the planet. I didn't talk to anyone about their needs before writing this product specification. And what I learned very quickly was that there are people who have influence in organizations. There are people who are leaders who have their own perspectives. And the only way that you could move the needle on something is by getting other people on board. It's by forming relationships. It's by being sensitive to the needs of not only the organization, but also your customers. It was really humbling. It was an incredibly humbling experience to realize that as a product manager, I have to get out of the way of the process. My job is to bring everyone to the same place based on all of the information that's available. Put it in a place where people can access it and understand it, and takes into account all of their needs, all of their expectations, all of their hopes and dreams and what they're trying to accomplish. The more you can do that, the more you can shop things around, and there are constraints. There are always constraints. Things are always challenging. The more you can do that, the more successful you'll end up being, and that you could actually start moving the organization forward. My ego was like, no, this is the worst thing ever. But I took away a very important lesson from that, which is it's not about me. It's not about me at all. It's about the the product and the people who are building the product and people who are using it. You know, it was an incredible experience to actually like take that away. So I'll leave it there.
Jessica, any engineering lens that?
Yeah, I think that's something that from an engineering perspective, when engineers aren't brought into the fold and they have opinions or they've seen something crash and burn in an organization before, and someone comes in and they're like, here's my product spec, and they're like, that's not gonna work, that's not gonna work, that's terrible, that's not gonna, and you should feel bad. Like that's basically what happened. And because they've built the thing and they've like understood. When I was at Connect RN, we had a bunch of engineers who had been there a really long time and had basically built this product from the ground up. So when product managers would come in and say, hey, this is how this should work, they're like, that's not even remotely how that should work. That's not how that's built. We would have to rebuild it. And and I think it doesn't come from, I don't think it comes from malice. It comes from excitement. Like, we're going to go build this product and we're going to do this thing. It's like, well, you didn't talk to all the stakeholders who are going to build it with you. It's a team thing, building a product. It's not a product manager coming in as a dictator and bonking people over the head and saying, here's your PRD, go build it. It's saying, this is what I want to accomplish. This is what I'm thinking about. Here's how I think it moves a needle. Here's what I think it does for members. What do you think? Does this touch any areas of the code that are legacy code that we might build on top of and get P0s and people calling in and the app bricks or something? Like, we don't want that to happen. Like, and having that empathy, and I think leading with curiosity. What does this mean for your team? What does this mean for the business? Do you ask people to poke holes in it? Say, what do you see going wrong with this product spec? What can you foresee being some pushback I'll get on it? Like, ask those questions. And it's better to sort of come, and I think that's the lesson you learned. I've learned that lesson. It's better to say, hey, I have a question. How would this affect you? How do you think about this? What do you think about this idea? And then be able to say, hey, here's my idea. So-and-so, 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 so-and-so were really instrumental in helping me put this together. Then everybody feels good. They've all had input. You feel good. Your idea has been vetted. And you don't want to spend a ton of time on it because you want to have that sort of bias for action and agility. But you also have to bring those people into the fold, because if they had said nothing, and if you may have had an idea that was so great on paper and it would have been built on some legacy code that could have like bricked the app. And I know I haven't considered legacy code sometimes. And what I learned from working with engineers who have been in the field for like 20, 30, 40 years is that is one of the first things you want to think about is, we can build this. What is it adjacent to? What is it going to use? And think about how this would translate into a tech plan. Those two documents should be kind of working in the same sort of circles. So yeah. Those are my thoughts.
Next one is actually I kind of want to put Stephanie on the podium here, because we're working with a younger company and the product specifications change quite often. How do you accommodate changes and updates, and at the same time not causing much disruption to the current work? So do you want to kick off?
Yeah, definitely. I think going off of what Jessica was saying about, you need to have everyone involved, all the stakeholders, especially developers. I think that's super critical, because I've had incidents where leadership will demand something or say, we've got to pivot the direction of this product or project, and development's like, that's not feasible. We don't use that environment. We don't use that technology. That's going to be at least a year's long worth of work, etc. So I think to try and minimize that disruption in the development process, it's so critical to have that communication and have every stakeholder involved throughout the entire project, especially early on. To me, just keeping everyone in the loop will minimize those sudden drastic changes, or at least the feeling of something coming out of nowhere or feeling drastic. So I just think the consistency of communication, that to me minimizes a lot of disruption. Keeping everyone in the loop, asking, hey, is this is this even feasible? Yeah, I think that's really critical, at least what I've seen in early stages of a company.
Yeah.
Can I add something? I think that it's important to recognize that there are different people with different sorts of influence in an organization as well. Like sometimes there are people who are best at informing the content of a specification, but then there are people who are best at sponsoring the effectiveness of the specification, right? And if you have a goal and you really believe in something, I think it's important to find who those sponsors are. Who are the people that are going to help you move the needle throughout an organization, especially if it's a large organization and it touches a lot of pieces of it. So just something to consider, right? Like you need to talk to your customers. You need to talk to the people who are on the ground developing software, who know the work the best. You need to talk to the people, the influence makers, the change makers within an organization, so that they can tell you how to best position the product. It takes sensitivity, and I think Jessica said something very important, which is lead with curiosity. Lead with curiosity through that entire process, and really try to like find the, how do I describe this, the path of least resistance through pushing an initiative that you feel is important for the company that aligns with the business case.
All right. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and actually talk about what goes into a product specification. What are the key components? Maybe Alicia, since you were already yeah.
Let's keep rolling. I think that there are some there are three major things that I think are very important. The first one is the story, the objective, what you're trying to build and why. You have to introduce the rationale behind what you're trying to build. What is it that is driving this specification to begin with? Why should people be interested? And that, of course, the best stories are told through the lens of the people who are consuming that, who are the people that need to actually act on it. So that's one section. The next section that tends to be the most important, I find, is the rationale and the data behind the spec itself. Sometimes I can go at the end, and people can sometimes go at the beginning, but how did you come to the conclusion to begin with, right? And I try to create summaries of the data that I've collected that help inform any of the decisions that I've made within the specification itself. It helps lend credence to it all together. And it makes it so that people ask the right questions back. They actually help create more detail within the spec by saying, okay, I don't need to ask questions about where the data came from, because they can see it, right? So if there are any holes, the data points them to the holes so that they can give better feedback on the spec itself, right? Because they can walk their way through it themselves, right? If you create the right summaries, if you present the right data, that supports the argument. And then the third is the content itself. It's the specifications. It's the shalls. Some people like to use shalls, some people like to use user stories, but this is what the product has to actually accomplish. And in my industry, being very regulated from a safety perspective, it's important to be very crisp with those requirements. They need to tell. It needs to be, there's a framework, SMART. I don't know if people have heard of this. It's a requirements framework: specific, measurable, achievable. I forget what the R is. Testable. It's the last one. I don't remember. The R is relevant. Yes. Thank you. So that kind of thing is important to think about too when you're writing the specification, because it's across the entire organization. From start to finish. How does this come out the other end? How does this requirement come out the other end so that you ensure that you've built the right thing? And in my case, that means traceability between requirements, and it means verification and validation cases for them, for those specific requirements. So those are kind of the three main things that I include in the spec. But again, I think if y'all have sort of gotten my stance on it, it tends to morph over time. There are things that I add or let go of when they don't serve me anymore. But consistently, those are the three things that tend to show up.
I want to dive into one of those specifically, and that's the data. So we're lucky at Whoop. We have Whoop Labs. If you ever want to get in a study, sign up for a study. And that's on the second floor of our building. You'll see people running in treadmills in Kenmore. So they're doing actual studies on how this works on actual people. We have performance science team who does a ton of research, data science that does a ton of research, business analytics, data analytics. if I don't talk to them and get the justification for something that wants to be built, that we want to build, then how do we justify it? How do we say there's a reason? It can't just be that, again, that shiny thing syndrome where I'm a goldfish and I'm like, ooh, I have an idea. I think this is going to be great. Well, good for me. But I also should not put my, we should be making data-driven decisions is basically what I'm saying. So they're a huge stakeholder. So if I want to build something, if I want to, I don't know, redo how the strap fits or something, I need to go to Whoop Labs and say, okay, I'm going to develop a prototype. We need to develop a prototype. We need to redo this. We need to test it on actual people. How do we get a study? How do we get, approved for this study? There's a lot of things that go into justifying why we should work on one thing versus another. And that's another thing that we haven't really talked about, but prioritization is going to become a big thing with product, because you could write 100 product specs. Good for you. You can only do 3 of them. So how do you prioritize? And a lot of times that comes from the data, and that's what's going to move the needle the most. If we're going after number of members, if we have something, I might love something that I've come up with, and Alicia and Steph might say, oh, well, we have another product idea over here. How do we judge those two? Well, it's shown that the data has shown that my idea is probably only going to get us 1,000 more members, but their product idea is going to get us 200,000 more members. Well, then we're going to go with that, right? So that is really, I think, that justification is sometimes missing in when we're doing product thinking, because we get excited about things and we want to build them, and we get focused on the designs and what it looks like. That's great, but again, minimum viable product. Make everything gray. Make those old, make it look like a Microsoft Windows 95 button. Whatever you have to do, make it as easy as possible. Get it out there. Get that data from users using it. There are so much software, a lot of startups that are represented here. It's Startup Week Boston that do that data analysis for you. Use that.
Stephanie, anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I mean, they are saying all the right things, and I totally agree. I think every time I create a PRD or I see one or any business case, the why does it matter, why should we care question is really what drives the project and the product development, coming anywhere from the leadership side all the way down to development. I kind of leverage both sides of it, and I've done the development part as a developer. At least for me, I always was curious about why we're solving this problem. What business value add are we providing? I don't want to work on the design of a button that doesn't really do much, what is the prioritization? What is the value add? I definitely think that's probably one of the most essential things to include in our PRD. I think another thing that I really see a lot of value in including is kind of the risks and dependencies, because I think having that be pretty transparent from the beginning, which you may not always know, but I think there's always some type of risk or caveat in the development of a product, and just knowing that from the start and being transparent about that across all the different cross-functional teams, I think that can also present questions and pose solutions that they might not have thought of, just thinking of the ideal solution.
Stephanie, I just want to +1 what you just said about thinking of risks and dependencies. That's super important. And I think that when, I'm a naturally anxious person. If I'm thinking about doing something in my personal life, I think of all the ways it could go wrong. Probably not a good thing to do. But in product, you want to do that. You want to think, how could this go awry? How could we make a mistake? What's the plan B, C, D for if this doesn't go the way we think it should? And I think I'm really glad you brought that up.
Just my 2 cents. Why, what. I also would like to add the who, the consumer persona, especially building an enterprise platform. Typically, most of the app developers or the engineers have a focus of thinking about APIs, etc. But at the end, if an end user is not seeing the data that it's coming from a machine in real time, so that's gonna impact user experience. So I always put that customer persona in there. So I think that's important. So thank you. And then I guess I would like to lead a little bit. I think I was watching time. Leading into that is maybe we can keep this short, but how much documentation is too much or too little?
That's such a fine line. And I think it's in that gray area again. It depends. Depends on the size of the company, depends on what you're building. Some things you can document it to death and then it never gets out. And so you really want that bias for action. Let's try it. Let's be agile. Let's like throw something out there and see what sticks. But if you're in a medical device type company, if you're dealing with PII, you need to have a little bit more documentation. So I know it's a crappy answer, but it depends. You have to have the consideration of where you are and sort of think about your lens and your company and think about like your sort of framework that you're working within. Is there cybersecurity? Are there cybersecurity concerns? If there's PII, people's personal identifiable information, are you taking people's health data? Could there be a leak? Well, then you should probably go consult your cybersecurity expert. It's really that gray area again. And I hate to say it depends for an answer, but it does.
It does. I agree. Personally, I know we have plenty of Confluence pages, but they have to be there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So for the smaller the startup, it seems to me that the more sensitive people are to the length of any specification. I've seen countless specs that I've wrote fail because people just don't read them. When they're too long, when they're too detailed. When you're at a small company and everyone is busy, everyone has a million things to do, you have to be sensitive to the fact that it takes time for people to absorb things. And when you put out a PRD or a spec and you're like, hey, we need to act on this, and people are not acting on it, I think that points to something really important, and it's important to evaluate what that means for the organization, right? What is it? Is it about the spec itself? Can you cut things out and still get the point across, right? And if you do that and people can't act on it still, then does that point to an organizational challenge that you're facing, right? What is it? If you get it to the bare bones MVP, like this is what we need to do, and it's not getting done, then what does that point to as an organization? Why can it not get done? Is it that the right team isn't in place to do it? Is it that people are working on the wrong things altogether? So you can use it to actually point to different things within an organization. But the length does matter from the perspective of it needs to be consumable. People need to be able to actually understand what's in the spec, understand how it impacts their work, how it impacts the customer. Otherwise, you end up building the wrong things. As specifications kind of work their way through an organization, they can morph and take on a life of their own. Like, okay, we need to do this for the customer. That means 10 different things for my portion of the product as an engineer. Does that actually add up to it? All these considerations, but I would advocate for using the PRD as almost like a diagnostic tool for your organization as well, and kind of use it as a feedback mechanism to understand where the team is at and what organizationally you might need to do to make it so that your initiatives actually make it through.
Yeah, thank you. I actually wanted to plug in about a book that I recently came to know, Smart Brevity. I don't know if anybody heard about it. It's from the people who started Axios. I hope I'm saying it right. But have the content, but have it in a concise way. I was like, I wish I knew this like years ago when I started the PM career. So you don't miss the gist of it, but you write it in a way that it doesn't lose somebody's attention. So I would look that up, but I'm still not done, but I'm having fun with it. Maybe I'll lead this to like Stephanie, is to once you have a PRD, I think the main challenge, at least I've faced in the past, is the maintenance and upkeep as the product and the company are evolving depending on where you're working. Stephanie, maybe how do you manage that whole process of ensuring the document is up to date? And
yeah, I mean, I think like what Jessica and Alicia are saying, you don't want to overkill a document and you want to keep it clean and concise. And obviously as the product develops, you can include more and more detail. But I think, you know, you have to be aware not every single stakeholder, not every single person is going to be part of every meeting, every step of the way. So I think having that PRD document be a source of truth and how that develop along the way is really important. I think for a growing company, I mean, it's not easy because usually when a company's growing, there's sometimes or more often not more stakeholders to have involved. It's a balancing act. It's kind of, you just have to go with it. I know that's not like a super clear black and white answer, but you have to be flexible in that as well and just make sure that everyone remains on the same page, working towards the same goal. I think at the end of the day, that will keep everyone aligned.
Yeah, anything either of you want to add? Yeah.
The entrepreneurial aspect of it.
Yeah, it's one of those questions. It's really, there is no clear-cut answer, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you believe in something? Will it help the organization? Are you willing to do what it takes to push it through? Which means being curious, which means talking to everybody, which means, you know, making adjustments and changes as necessary. It's tough. It takes a lot of sensitivity, but you learn the most from that experience. I think that's why I believe being a product manager or being a product person is so valuable at the end of the day, because you have the ability to stretch as far as it takes to actually create impact in an organization. And when that's reflected within a product's requirements document, you're essentially presenting to the organization the case for it. This is what I've learned through my curiosity, exploration, generation, talking to everybody. And this is what I believe will actually create the impact that we need in an organization. And if you look at it from that perspective, like, it's the coolest job in the world. You get to create change. So I love specs and I hate them at the same time.
So before we go to the audience questions, one kind of last question. You know, any lessons learned to each of you? Maybe we start off with Eliseo. Is one piece of advice that you would give to fellow PMs? What would that be?
Be creative. Don't be afraid to fail. Really don't be afraid to fail. There is no right or wrong way. There is no best way that will work every single time, guaranteed. Be sensitive and allow yourself to make mistakes as far as creating specifications and communicating to people. Be open and receptive to ideas and create a culture around you that supports the greatest outcome in that way by just not judging yourself so much by writing a product specification.
Jessica?
My best advice, this is my grandmother's advice, so I'm stealing it. Listen to understand and not to reply. I think a lot of times when we're in conversation, we're listening half-heartedly and we're listening to figure out what our next thing is going to be. I'm ADHD, I do it. I definitely do that, but I try to, that curiosity, listen to understand. Don't focus on what you're going to say and how you're going to reply and how you're going to take it. Take notes, listen to really understand what your stakeholders and people are telling you, and be okay with actioning on that if that isn't what your vision was. Be okay with your vision changing based on people's input.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo both of those points, I mean, I think fostering a community and a team that is going to be open to voicing their opinions, it's going to create dynamic problem solving. And that's what's really important for creating the best product for your company.
Any audience questions, maybe? We have 10 minutes.
All right, I see a question back here. We'll go with the in-person audience first and then leave some time for a virtual if it's possible.
Hi, I'm a user researcher, so I'm really curious about the partnership between research and PM. So our team has been talking about how we decide on conducting the most impactful research. So in your opinion, what are some examples of when it's really necessary to conduct a user research study, and when a product manager should feel empowered by what they already know about the product, what they already know about user needs, to make tough decisions without kind of putting a strain on those resources, especially on a small team, when we want to, again, make sure we're conducting the most impactful research?
I think that's like sort of, it's like this, like a feedback mechanism almost. And so from a research perspective, oftentimes, at least at Whoop, our research teams are working on their work 18 months out sometimes, in some cases. And so from a product angle, we need to say, what is on your 2024 roadmap for research that's going to land, so that we can think of product ideas that sort of match up. And then product managers also need to feel empowered to, if they come up with something, to go validate that if necessary with your team. And so I think I almost think sometimes there should be not necessarily user researchers embedded on every team, but have like certain teams that you work with, so that you're constantly putting things out there and they understand your roadmap and what you're working on. For example, on the strap, like if you were working on blue straps for 2024, and say we never had blue straps, and the product owner would know, now I'm going to go create a shell for a PRD for blue straps. And I know that research is going to land in 2024. And then keep that conversation open, whether it's Slack, whether it's email, however you want to do it. And then know when your research is going to land, and know when they're going to get the input in order to put in their product spec. Alicia and Steph were also talking about having that data and being able to say, this is, and that's also, your team is going to help make some go, no go decisions. And so I think having that constant loop of feedback with your team is really important, but understanding that the teams do work on some different like timelines.
Anything you want to add? Oh, good. Okay.
Yeah, I can. To me, it's progress, not perfection, right? At some point, you can analyze something to death, and I will never be able to get my job done without amazing user researchers and amazing analysts to help back up the decisions that we make. Sometimes you can get paralyzed, I think, by analysis, and like try to figure out every single thing. And I've learned over my career that, you know, sometimes you do need to make a call, but there's always risks associated with that, and it's about analyzing the risks. You know, what risk are we willing to take on, and what is the impact on the business again? So when partnering with user researchers, that's kind of the lens that we take, because you could research any number of things, right? But when it comes to figuring out what the most important things are, what the most important data to get is, it always relates back to the strategy, the risk, and what it takes to make sure that your business is successful. And that's kind of where we kind of can draw the line and say, when we get this data, when we understand the users from this perspective, from this angle, then we have enough to make a call and mitigate the risks for the organization.
There's a question over there. Yeah.
So I had kind of a follow-on question to that, which is, okay, you know, you made some assertions in your business case, and you've done the work, you've built the feature product, what have you, and there's some feedback that's now coming back. There's data that's coming in, and you're discovering that the problem is more complicated, exactly what you thought, totally different. What are some best practices that you might share around that post-build analysis, and how to decide whether to continue down this path or to do something different?
I think the worst thing for an engineering team is when you just drop something at MVP and there's no like version 2, version 3, because a lot of time engineering teams want to go in and they want to fix. They love tech debt. They want to go fix all the things and make everything like perfect. But then there's also that balance of, do we go, if something is not working the way we intended, do we keep, we're probably not going to keep pushing down the original path that we thought we were going to go. How are we going to fork it? How is the path, you know, the 2 paths diversion in Yellowwood? What are the 2 paths or the 3 paths that we could take now? And I think that if you have a PRD and you're kind of chunking things out as MVP, should have, nice to have, maybe some days, those, if you're thinking about worst case scenarios, you're kind of already tooling that around in your head. And so if you put that in the PRD, that's going to immediately anchor you back when you get what happens if we get data that shows that this didn't work the way we thought. Okay, let's go to plan B. Let's go to plan C. Let's go to plan D. So I think you can bake that in from the beginning and sort of go in with that, I won't say fatalistic mindset, but like sort of that mindset of like, what could go wrong? Poke holes in your own idea. And then if you get that data, then it won't be so much of a pivot where you have to go write a whole new PRD and you're jumping to a whole new thing. You've kind of already thought about that. And you've also been communicating with everybody and had the stakeholders in it. So they are already aware of it and are like probably a little bit more receptive than if you just threw something over the wall, like this didn't work. Here's the whole new way we're doing.
One final question.
Thank you. Oh, does this work? Okay. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. I'm so glad that many of you are in the health space. My background was in healthcare. And my question could be a little bit technical, but I'm wondering, it's like in the health tech sector, and given that it's highly regulated, and there are always questions for some products about clinical efficacy, and how, in order for the PRD or the spec, for any product to be successfully supporting building a good product, and also at the same time not sacrificing agility, how do you handle meeting these regulatory requirements? Do you often have to work with the clinical departments? If you do you? Or, how to handle it? Or do you embed someone inside your team so that it's truly agile and you have that kind of feedback as you work on it and as you iterate? Thank you.
I would say embed somebody on the team who understands medical device, who understands compliance, who understands the FDA, CDC, all of those regulations. They are extremely specific. When you are, I used to work at MITRE, which is like a government kind of like consulting, I guess we call it. And the government will nickel and dime you to death on anything that you, especially from a medical device standpoint, that you missed. Having someone on your staff who has done that before, who has put a medical device in market or gotten at least to the 510K submission stand like that, and understands FDA feedback, iterating on that is really important. Then they should be embedded in the team.
Thank you so much. Can everyone give a big round of applause for this panel?